God, with us in these human words which I speak, may there be a word from you, heard in our minds and in our hearts, that we might be made truly alive for your sake. Amen. Are you looking at my scars? I asked. I couldn't tell exactly where his gaze had landed. Was the dog doing something funny behind me? Yeah, I was, he said, almost apologetically. How do they make you feel? Well, I'm not wild about them, but I'm not about to let them stop me. Stop you from what? He asked. Oh, wearing short sleeves, wearing shorts, living my life, loving big dogs, anything. See, it's suddenly short sleeve season, and as many of you who already know the story might imagine, I have quite a bit of scarring from the dog attack that punctuated my start among you. Not about to let that stop me. That's what I say, anyway, and it is fully my intention, but I'd be lying to you if I tried to pretend that they don't bother me at all, that I'm not self-conscious, even hyper-aware of them. And those are just the visible ones, of course. And I assume that puts me in pretty good company. I assume that we all carry scars and hurts and wounds with us. And the truth is that some hurts don't go away and some wounds leave indelible scars. And sometimes we feel like we need to explain or hide or account for them, that they shame us in some way. There's places we'd rather keep hidden. And part of the uncomfortable thing about this gospel story, I suspect, is Thomas's gall in asking to see Jesus' wounds. The nerve, right? The impropriety. Shouldn't we all know better than to go poking and prodding in other people's wounded places? It's unseemly, it's bad manners, it's in poor taste. Just accept things at face value and move on about it, can't you, Thomas? It's the polite thing to do. But lucky for Thomas and lucky for us, Jesus never seems to care quite as much about impropriety as he does about real presence, connection, and engagement, right? Real pain, real life. Jesus doesn't ask us to deny our pain, but instead joins us in it. He doesn't shame us for doubting, but just meets us where we are. By this point, Mary Magdalene has seen Christ risen from the dead, and the rest of the disciples who'd been holed up behind locked doors have seen him too by now. Just take our word for it, Thomas, they say. But Thomas simply can't, right? He needs a little more. And his honest and unashamed skepticism is a gift to us, really. Thomas finds himself surrounded by his friends who have already encountered the risen Christ, and he finds that he just can't take somebody's word for it. Maybe somebody else could, but Thomas just isn't wired that way. He wants and needs more. He needs to experience it for himself, right? And he asks for that. And I suspect that it's actually our own shame in that same sort of need, and the idea that such a desire for something concrete is at odds with faith somehow. I suspect it's those things that have pinned him with that unfortunate nickname, Doubting Thomas. When we say, oh, don't be such a doubting Thomas, it's a way to shame people who can't or won't just assent to whatever it is we think ought to be obvious, or at least accepted. But I wonder how different church and religion would be, how different we would be, our lives and our relationships, if we instead held space for that doubt. Right? Both our own doubt and other people's doubt. Held space for it in the same generous and non-judgmental way that Jesus does for Thomas. What would change if we didn't attach shame or judgment to doubting and questioning? What would happen if we really internalized that Jesus does not require us to be, feel, act, or believe in a particular way before being present to us, right? That we don't have to contort ourselves to fit into a small range of acceptable emotions and responses in order to be valid, in order to be good and worthy of God's love, even in order to be disciples. What if Jesus' own tender wounds and his willingness to let them show, to let them be touched, were permission for us to fully inhabit our whole selves, wounds and doubt and skepticism and all, without shame, without reservation, right? That neither our wounds nor our skepticism discount us from God's presence. Actually, they're just part of the package of being human, which is a package that God happens to love very much. So, what if the resurrection doesn't mean attaining unassailable perfection, right? But instead means that God brings new life from the dead or deadened places in us, right? From our wounds and our scars and our shame, our fear, even our doubts, right? Those places that need resurrection the most. That those places don't have to be locked away in shame. They're simply another part of this story. We love an unmitigated win, of course, right? We want the triumph and the alleluias, and we love to be inspired by hardships once they've been overcome, right? Battle scars that have become stories of victory and heroism. But I think that we read this story just a week, mere days after our big triumphant resurrection celebration, because it's so crucial, so important that we remember that the wounds and the hard parts and the vicissitudes of life, right, are also part of this same story. That some doubts do linger, and some wounds never quite heal. And we don't have to hide those things, and we don't have to hide our shame or our skepticism or those wounds that still fester, because it's precisely in those places that Jesus meets us. Precisely in those places. So, if the joy of Easter is difficult to access this year for whatever reason, or if you're dogged by shame or fear or grief, if the scars you carry feel heavy, or you just feel like you need a little more proof, a little more presence before you can inhabit this resurrection story, it turns out you're already smack in the middle of it. If you're feeling the letdown after the mountaintop experience of Easter, or if you've been feeling down for what seems like forever now, if you're trapped in doubt or your faith is feeling thin, if you just can't seem to match the feeling of certainty and celebration of those around you, you're already right here in the middle of this resurrection story. Our faith is full of paradoxes, right? As Christians, we know that we live by dying, we give by receiving, we find power in giving it away. The last are first, the outsiders welcome to the table, the wounded are healed, and Jesus' resurrected body still retains its scars. The marks of pain are still visible, and when Thomas reaches toward him, still tender. And that's the point. That's the point. There's no pain or grief or doubt that we feel that Jesus won't meet us in. Put your finger here, he says. See my hands and my side. You are not alone in your pain. Peace be with you. Amen.